Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mustard Seed podcast. This week I have on Nick Colletta. Nick, welcome.
Hi, Joe. Great to be here. This is my first
Absolutely.
podcast, so excited.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this one as well, especially since you joined Semler Scientific around the same time I joined Semler. Can you kind of share your professional background and, how you got into, the Bitcoin Treasury company?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with my education, then I'll jump into professional. Um, I have my bachelor's and master's in accounting. I have my CPA. I had it since 2023. Um, and prior, after I completed my education, I joined a St. Louis firm that does tax and accounting work, normal tax returns, accounting, everything like that. And then about 3 years ago, I made the switch over to Deloitte Digital Assets and worked on their tax team. And that was really interesting and a lot of fun. And then just recently, about 2 months ago, I joined Semler as the treasurer. And yeah, just excited to be here. That's um, my background. And yeah, just excited to join the Bitcoin side finally.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dive into a number of points that you just made there. Maybe we can start with Deloitte, like working at Deloitte Digital Assets. What was that like working with, crypto native companies while kind of being a Bitcoiner?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Uh, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners are aware, and I'm sure you're aware, like it's kind of hard to find a job directly related to Bitcoin. So I was looking for any job that I could get as close to Bitcoin as humanly possible, and that was Deloitte Digital Assets based on my experience and the skills that I had. Yeah, working with crypto native companies was interesting. There's a lot of gray area that we operated in and helped these companies navigate, whether it was like the actual foundation or it was the U.S. company side. But uh, yeah, being a Bitcoiner, it was kind of tough because um, you see the same cap table, you see the same investors in all of these companies that are getting token allocations and insider, um, sweetheart deals essentially. So that was a little tough, but it also just solidified my belief that Bitcoin was the only thing that really mattered, and it was the best money. So while it was disheartening, it definitely just solidified my belief in Bitcoin.
So were you a Bitcoiner, I guess, before you joined Deloitte? Is that right?
I was, yes,
Nice.
yep,
So
and
did it make like, oh, go ahead.
all of the partners knew that I was a Bitcoiner. So if there was ever any like Bitcoin related projects that came up, they always pushed them my way, which was nice. That was very nice.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I mean, obviously I have a similar background in the sense of I'm a Bitcoin maximalist and I dabbled in crypto when I first started learning about the entire space and then realized, maybe Bitcoin's the true innovation and maybe all these other things are, you know, cool technologies or, they're outright scams to some extent. But and it may not be like good long-term savings technology. Like did you kind of have a similar perspective going into Deloitte and then like working with Deloitte and working with those crypto native companies? Did it make you like more like scared or worried or cautious about the crypto native space, or did it like make it to where like okay, they're not as bad as I thought? I'm curious how you thought about that.
I think it was just as I thought. Like I didn't think that they really, made it any worse, or they didn't influence my decision more or less. It just was more of a confirmation of what I already thought, which was really nice to have. Just being a Bitcoin maxi, you see all of that innovation on the crypto side, and you really wonder, um, you know, is Bitcoin the true currency of the future? And I believe so. And I've just seen all of that technology come through on the crypto side, and really the killer app of blockchain is money, and Bitcoin is the best money.
hmm Yeah, I agree with that. So you wrapped up Deloitte and you joined Semler. I'm curious, why did you decide to join Semler as treasurer?
Yeah. So I have always wanted to be on the Bitcoin side, obviously. So when the opportunity came up to join a Bitcoin treasury company, I had to jump on it. And I think treasurer really fit well with my background being in tax and accounting and working all on the financial side. So yeah, just having the opportunity to do Bitcoin related work, but also have it fit my background was really unique. And I felt like this was the opportunity that I really had to go for. And I'm happy it worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to your pre-Deloitte days, do you remember like the first time you initially heard about Bitcoin, and do you remember, what your perspective was and what you initially thought about it?
Sure, yeah. I first heard about Bitcoin going into winter 2018, but I was more focused on the crypto side of that. So that's when I was really, buying everything but Bitcoin, you would say. Um, and, as the market came down, I got burned, but I was still in college at the time, so I didn't really, lose a lot of money. I was more just playing around. But when 2019 came around, that's when I really started to dive into, why Bitcoin matters, like what is the ethos of Bitcoin, and just what sets it apart from all the other cryptocurrencies.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on, why Bitcoin only, or why Bitcoin in particular is interesting? Like, say someone comes to you and they're like, "Hey, I invest in Ethereum, I invest in Solana, I invest in, you know, Bitcoin treasury companies and a bunch of other different things." Why should they focus, on Bitcoin compared to other cryptocurrencies?
I think I said it earlier, but really the crux of my argument is that the killer app of a blockchain is a money, and Bitcoin is the best money. So if you look at Ethereum or Solana, you know they had pre-sales, they had insiders. So if you're going to look at it from a pure money perspective, it's pretty impossible to say that Solana would be a good money if they had insider sales, or Ethereum would be a good money if they had a 70% pre-mine. Like it just doesn't work. And that's why I think Bitcoin really has the ability to be the best money, because there were no insiders, and everybody at the beginning was just supporting a project. Like there was no financial incentive for them to do what they did, right? So that's what makes Bitcoin special in my eyes.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. And, it's like Michael Saylor says, there is no second best. Like, it's a kind of a cliche statement, but money is the most saleable and most marketable good. And the most implies that there's one. And like
Hmm.
that's, money is a network good. And so it's like you have to pick the best one because everyone else is trying to pick the best one. And then it comes down to like, well, which one's actually the best one? And I think you made that point pretty clear there.
Yep,
Um,
agreed.
I want to ask you also more about Bitcoin and corporations. Why is Bitcoin interesting or important for corporations? Like, obviously, Semler Scientific was the second publicly traded company to adopt a Bitcoin standard. From your perspective as treasurer, why do you think Bitcoin is even important for any corporation?
Yeah, I think corporations are always trying to find like where to park their assets, where to park their money. um, and Bitcoin having like the best return and the best CAGR rate over almost any period of time, maybe not 1 year, but having a great CAGR rate, you really have to look at, okay, should we allocate money to XYZ investment, or should we allocate to Bitcoin with this CAGR rate over a certain amount of time? So yeah, I think it's really important for corporations to consider, and obviously that's why we're here today. Um, but it's just still flying under the radar. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for current Bitcoin treasury companies to amass a large amount of Bitcoin. And then when everybody else catches on, obviously, um, we'll be in a better position for the future.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear if you agree with this. Like, Bitcoin is an incredibly volatile asset, obviously, over the short term. And, corporations, tend to either do stock buybacks or dividends, like decapitalizing the company over time. Whereas like Bitcoin treasury companies tend to stockpile a massive, position in Bitcoin as like long-term savings. And yes, it's like hyper volatile in the short term, which the world perceives as very risky. But in reality, it's like if you have a core operating business and you have a huge pile of Bitcoin, it's like that actually makes the company a lot stronger and safer and can weather a lot of potential drawdowns or problems with the core business. Do you agree with that? Like Bitcoin, like is perceived to make companies more risky, but in reality, it may fortify the balance sheet and strengthen the company.
Yep, totally agree with that statement. And that was one of the reasons that I really liked Semler and why I wanted to join Semler is because Semler had that operating business and they did have that balance sheet of Bitcoin, which you know just made them a really good. They're going to be a really we're going to be a really good company in the future, and really when you take a look at the operating business, like in a bear market, like that's going to be really valuable.
Do you think we'll see more companies with like real operating businesses adopting a Bitcoin treasury strategy in the future?
I think that's the normal course of business. That's exactly what's going to happen. Um, because those companies are going to keep looking for assets that can outperform inflation. And there's so few of those out there, but Bitcoin is obviously the winner in that scenario.
Agreed. If someone approached you and they're like, okay, Nick, how do you explain Semler's Bitcoin treasury strategy, to a complete person, to someone that's not even really paying attention to what's happening in this space? How would you explain that?
Yeah. Our strategy, I believe our strategy is to acquire as much Bitcoin as we can in an accretive way to the shareholders. So really what that translates to is increasing the Bitcoin per share in various different ways. Like it could be a common ATM, it can be other methods that have yet to be explored. And that's what I really think is the exciting part about the space is that we're in the beginning innings of Bitcoin treasury companies. So we really get to develop new ideas to acquire that Bitcoin. And yeah, that's really what I'm excited about is to try and develop those ideas.
When you think of Bitcoin treasury companies as a whole, is there like an important KPI or metric that you really like to evaluate performance? Is it simply like performance of the stock? Is it BTC yield? Is it Bitcoin per share? Is it like a combination of all of these? And like, what do you think is an appropriate time frame to evaluate the performance of a specific metric? Like, is Bitcoin and our Bitcoin treasury companies a short term bet or are they more of like a long term bet?
Yeah, I'll answer your first question. So I really like Bitcoin per share because that's what I would want to look at as an investor is like, are you growing? Are you outpacing or are you growing the Bitcoin that I own in each individual share? That's what I would really want to see. Um, but I don't think it can be measured on anything less than a year. So if I'm looking at a Bitcoin treasury company on a year over year basis, if you are increasing the Bitcoin per share, I think that's a very good thing. Um, and I think again, just piggybacking off of that, like investment in Bitcoin treasury companies should be looked at a long term basis, just like
Yeah, that
Bitcoin is. Like Bitcoin is long term, so therefore you have to look at Bitcoin treasury companies uh, from a long term perspective.
that relates to kind of what I was speaking about with CJ from strategy, where he mentioned like Saylor and his preferred equity is infinite duration credit, where and Saylor sometimes talks about like time frames of like 4 years or even decades, and I think that's part of the reason why Bitcoin treasury companies use quote unquote intelligent leverage, which is like long duration debt because you don't necessarily know what Bitcoin's going to be worth in a short period of time, but you're as a Bitcoiner, we're fairly confident that Bitcoin's going to be more valuable in dollar terms. That's far like years into the future, and that's exactly why all these Bitcoin treasury companies primarily finance themselves with longer duration debt. Is that kind of your line of thinking as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And um, I just think as long as you're increasing the Bitcoin per share, it doesn't necessarily matter about the share price because that's going to be highly dependent on Bitcoin. So again, just piggybacking off what you said, 4 years, 1 year, like you really need to look at this from a long-term perspective.
Do you have a perspective on how you think about MNAV premiums? Like, obviously, the Bitcoin treasury community has been probably fascinated with that metric, and which it is very interesting, right? It's the premium at which the stock trades at relative to the Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Do you have a perspective on like how you generally think about that for the industry?
Yeah, I think MNAV is more a reflection of the appetite for Bitcoin treasury companies. It's the sentiment towards Bitcoin treasury companies rather than it is um, like a reflection of the business. So as we've seen over the past, couple months here, a lot of these Bitcoin treasury MNAVs have compressed, and it would be different if it was a singular company's MNAV compressing, but it's across the board. We've really seen these MNAVs compress. So I think it's just a sentiment indicator for where, sentiment for investors and, their willingness to buy Bitcoin treasury companies at the moment.
Yeah, that seems to be logical to me for me. Um, with your role, like, do you think of Bitcoin as a hurdle rate for capital allocation within the business?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And I think everybody that is within a Bitcoin treasury company views it the same way. That's why we're here, because we really can't find another asset that provides the same growth potential and it is as pristine as it's the most pristine asset that exists so far, and I think it will remain that way in perpetuity. So really, Bitcoin for all Bitcoin treasury companies should be the hurdle rate, and I believe it is the hurdle rate. Um,
Yeah, I've always found like the hurdle rate discussion kind of funny and interesting because it's like we say Bitcoin is money or a good form of long-term savings technology, and if Bitcoin is money, then when we say well Bitcoin should be the hurdle rate, we're basically just saying you should plan to make money, not lose money, right? Like it's like if you invest $100 into something, our money today dollars, you're not gonna be happy earning $99 back. You're gonna be happy earning more than $100. And we just say Bitcoin is the hurdle rate. We're just saying like, well, Bitcoin is our money, and if we invest 1,000 Bitcoins, we want to get back more than 1,000 Bitcoins.
exactly, exactly.
How early do you think it is, like looking at corporate adoption or just global Bitcoin adoption broadly? Like, how do you think a lot of people are using Bitcoin as a hurdle rate or a benchmark for capital allocation, or is it still like absurdly early in the grand scheme of finance?
I think we're still really early in the grand scheme of finance. Absolutely. We're just now seeing like Bitcoin based products through strategy. And I mean, even then, we're still in the first inning with those products. So yeah, and I think it's skewed really in the United States versus elsewhere. Like I think other countries that can't rely on their fiat maybe view Bitcoin as the hurdle rate, or even view Bitcoin as their money. But here in the U.S., the financial epicenter of the world, right? We really don't view it that way. So I do think we're in that early stage of Bitcoin viewed as a hurdle rate, and in terms of adoption as well.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Like, what do you think drives Bitcoin adoption over time? Is it like just is it the price going up and natural scarcity and new demand leading to the price increase and that captures people's attention? Is it Michael Saylor going on podcast and talking about it? Is it or something else that I don't haven't mentioned. Like, what do you think drives Bitcoin adoption?
I think the need for Bitcoin really drives adoption. So like if you look, like I said, if you look in the United States, like we don't, although the dollar debases every year, it's not as quick as, a third world country that hyperinflates. So if you look at a hyperinflated country, like that'll drive Bitcoin adoption immediately. They will immediately look for something that's outside of their fiat system that they can, you know, send, send to other people or, just hold on their phone and, exit that country. So I really think government currencies and government fiat, government games actually drives Bitcoin adoption um, more than anything else.
That's actually a really great point because Saylor will say you need a need to know, and it's like strategy or micro strategy formally when they actually were considering the Bitcoin adopting Bitcoin as part of their treasury. It's like they had a slow growing business. It was still profitable. They had all this cash piling up. Like they needed a solution. Eric, when he's talked about Semler Scientific being in a similar situation, it's like they needed a solution, and it seems like that's probably going to be like the next wave of corporations adopting Bitcoin. It's may not be Nvidia that's crushing it and is growing really fast and has done it incredibly well. It's probably going to be these companies or individuals or governments that have a reason to need Bitcoin for whatever reason it might be.
Yep, and they don't have to rely on a government currency to do that. Yep.
Yep, agreed. So I want to ask you this: as treasurer of Semler Scientific, what tools do you think about when managing a Bitcoin treasury? Like you have ATMs, you have convertible notes, you have preferred equity, you have pure debt, you have cash. Like how do you think about all of these combined and especially when you're thinking about the long term goals of Semler Scientific?
Yeah, I think you think about all of them, but you need to think about them in the context of your business and your financial positioning at that moment in time. So it's always an evaluation scenario where you're evaluating ATM, you're evaluating all the other options that we may have to accretively accumulate Bitcoin. Um, but really, it's based on your financial positioning at that moment in time. And then you also look at things that maybe haven't been done by Bitcoin treasury companies. You're always trying to think outside the box and innovate, just like Michael Saylor has with all of his preferred products.
How do you think about Sailor's what he's done over the last 5 years, I guess, at this point, right? Like he started just adopting strategy or Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. Then he kind of got into the convertible note game, borrowing dollars at low interest rates with a little bit of equity dilution down the road. And then now, like this year, I guess, basically, he's gotten into the preferred equity game. STRC was like the largest IPO of this year, I believe. How do you think about like the change and the innovation that Saylor's brought to the Bitcoin securities space, and how do you think about it? How do you think it evolves over the coming years?
Well, I think he really created the entire Bitcoin treasury company uh, corporation, corporate structure. So that, all credit to him there. Um, and I think he'll continue to innovate. Like that's what he does, and he does it very well. Um, but in the future, like I think he will, um, maybe have other Bitcoin treasury companies start to innovate in other ways and break from the mold that he has provided for all of these Bitcoin treasury companies. So I'm excited to see what all these other treasury companies do or decide to do, um, and how that ties back into what Michael's doing, and if Michael were to adopt one of those strategies or not. I think that'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm also curious and excited to see what new ideas that other Bitcoin treasury companies kind of bring to the market. It's going to be very exciting. I'm curious on this one, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it's a point like worth thinking about in a little bit more detail. Obviously, like Bitcoin is this hyper volatile asset. you're managing the treasury of Semler, like how do you think about the volatility in the context of we still have a real valuable healthcare business. We also have a convertible note that's due still 5 years from now. Then we also have interest payments, that need to be made on that convertible note. How do you balance and think about the volatility compared to all of the other things that you have to, make sure that are managed properly?
Yeah, when we go to purchase Bitcoin in the market, we think about it very thoughtfully because of that volatility. It's just baked in up front, right? We're a long-term perspective on Bitcoin. Like we want to buy and we never want to sell Bitcoin. So with that in mind, we always want to ensure that we're never putting ourselves in a position that we would have to sell Bitcoin. So we bake that volatility into our purchases when we go buy Bitcoin. We say, okay, what is our cash flow needs for, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and how much Bitcoin can we, or how much money can we actually allocate to Bitcoin? So where we don't need to be put in a position to actually have to sell Bitcoin. So yeah, it's always at the forefront of every decision that we make is, given the volatility of Bitcoin, given our long-term expectations of Bitcoin, how do we get from point A of year zero right now to 10 years from now where we believe Bitcoin's tens of millions of dollars or and beyond. So yeah, we really are thoughtful in the allocation of cash that we do buy, that we use to buy Bitcoin with.
Yeah. And on that point, Michael Goldstein, who's like, a longtime Bitcoiner that wrote a lot of really interesting stuff about Bitcoin over the years and economics in particular. And he always made like a really interesting point that I thought was kind of funny and unique, where he said, okay, yes, Bitcoin is incredibly volatile in the short term, which means if you want to protect yourself and your treasury, you should actually hold a lot of money, a lot of Bitcoin on your balance sheet to make sure that you're able to weather that volatility in case you might need savings in the future. I always thought that was kind of an interesting, like, unique perspective where it's like in traditional world, volatility might scare you and be like, okay, we want a little bit of that. Whereas, Michael made the point where it's like, well, if Bitcoin is the best long-term savings technology, then maybe if it is volatile in the short run, maybe that means you need to hold a lot more of it on your balance sheet, or maybe have lower, more conservative debts to if you happen to take on debt. And then that's kind of how you manage the volatility. You just have a even larger position to where if it does fall, well, you still have a pretty huge position of Bitcoin. I'm curious,
Right.
do you agree with that? Yeah.
I think how I view it is, it's one thing to own Bitcoin. It's another thing to have your Bitcoin in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
You have to be very, very thoughtful with the Bitcoin that you do have. So I think that just goes into every decision that we do make with Semler's Treasury.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that like one of the most important aspects of a Bitcoin treasury, or even just like an individual holding Bitcoin itself, is like making sure that you simply don't lose the Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely at the forefront of of our treasury is really being secure, um, and you just you just never want to be in a position where you don't take enough steps to secure your Bitcoin. As personally, I own Bitcoin. I know I'm personally you own Bitcoin as well. Um, it's just a heightened. It's even more with the treasury, right? Because we really want to protect that. We really want to ensure that we hit the finish line, or we get to 10, 15, 20 years from now with that same amount of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at a treasury company, it starts to become a honeypot. So it's just even more. It's even more secure. It's even more thoughtful around controls um, and audit procedures, everything like that.
Is there any, like, when it comes to, obviously you're only 2 months on the job as a treasurer. How do you think about like audits and like accounting standards and risk and controls when it comes to a Bitcoin treasury? Like, do most people that hold Bitcoin and invest in Bitcoin treasury companies, do you think they have like a really good understanding of how all of that works? Or do you, like with your accounting background, do you think there's some things that maybe the Bitcoin community should be aware of. That's like, actually, like, this is how this works, and like these are like these typical risk and controls that a corporation would have. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's just because we're a public company and a lot of these Bitcoin treasury companies are public, there is a lot of, you know, controls that we need to have in place. There's a lot of things that we need to think about when we're audited and our financial statements are audited, our, internal controls are audited. So we just have to give an extra level of care there, and we can't necessarily be as open with how we are securing our Bitcoin. Like I know proof of reserves is a big topic. Um, for audit purposes, like your auditor could be making that decision. It's not necessarily the treasury company. Um, so I think just giving an extra, some leeway there. Like I understand the argument of wanting proof of reserves. I would love to give proof of reserves, but sometimes there are security concerns, sometimes there are audit concerns, and we just want to be uh, as precautious with our Bitcoin as we possibly can, and um, sometimes to have an auditor sign off on your audit, like that just may not be possible. So um, I do think it's the marrying of the cypherpunk and the traditional finance world. So I think there's obviously growing pains there, and this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, the whole like it's fascinating to think about like the core Bitcoin ethos of not your keys, not your coins, perfect self sovereignty, combined with the idea that, okay, well, that this technology has created this superior form of money, which, like, if that's true, then yes, individuals are going to sovereignly hold Bitcoin, but also like corporations that are private and publicly traded are also probably going to start holding Bitcoin too, if it's actually a great form of money. And then governments themselves are going to actually hold Bitcoin too, which is exactly what we've seen. So it's interesting, like, watching this play out in real time, basically, of, okay, this core cyberpunk ethos of Bitcoin versus like these other entities that exist in the world today, and want to capture some of this NGU technology for themselves. It's like we're kind of all just watching this play out in real time, and it's interesting to see like the compare and contrasting those two entities, or those three entities, and seeing how they're all adopting Bitcoin in their own unique ways.
Yep, and I think this was the ultimate path of Bitcoin. Like you said, if this is the ultimate money, like this was the ultimate path forward. Like corporations are going to adopt it, nation states, pension funds, you name it, they're going to get involved because they are starting to recognize as well that this is a superior form of money. So I do think it was inevitable. Like there was no stopping this.
Do you think? I agree, of course. Do you think Wall Street is going to co-opt Bitcoin and corner it and kind of manipulate it, or do you think Bitcoin is kind of co-opting Wall Street and forcing them to create Bitcoin like products, and actually it's more Bitcoin that's breaking into Wall Street rather than Wall Street breaking Bitcoin?
I think Bitcoin is breaking Wall Street because like we've talked about, Bitcoin is the hurdle rate. We just understood that at a faster pace than all of Wall Street. So we actually have, an advantage. And a lot of people listening to this podcast also have that advantage. So I think really Bitcoin is breaking Wall Street. Wall Street just hasn't really woken up to the fact that, Bitcoin is the best money and has the best return rates. So um, yeah, I'm really excited to see all of the new products that come out. Um, and how Wall Street embraces Bitcoin. But the greatest thing about it is that we had 16 years to front run Wall Street, which was really like no other asset in the entire world, which was fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to get your thoughts on this one as well. Like, I heard someone say this the other day that Michael Saylor is a titan of the Bitcoin industry at this point. running strategy for 5 years now, having it being one of the best performing stocks in the last 5 years in the entire public U.S. equity market. Um, and then someone mentioned that they compared it to other like titans of industry of banking or of technology or of oil and gas or energy and so on and so forth. Like there hasn't been another titan that was like telling his competitors exactly his strategy and how to copy their exact business model and then encouraging you to go out and copy his exact business model. Whereas that's actually been happening with Michael, and like that's what he's been doing. He every time Semler buys Bitcoin, he likes the tweets and he like replies and he's excited about it. What do you think of that? And like, do you find that interesting? And yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that is deeply rooted in the Bitcoin ethos of wanting Bitcoin to succeed at any, and he will do anything to help others succeed with Bitcoin as well. So I'm very appreciative of it. I think it is fantastic, but again, I think his actions are deeply rooted in like the Bitcoin ethos of like really pushing Bitcoin adoption forward. And that's why he gave everybody the playbook. That's why he has been, doing the preferreds and guiding people alongside his journey and really giving them the playbook because
Mm-hmm.
he really believes in the vision of Bitcoin being the best money.
Yeah, and then I find it funny that simultaneously it's been, you could argue like corporate Bitcoin adoption probably on the grand scheme of finance and money is happening really fast, arguably. But if you zoom in and you have a short time frame, it's like it's been 5 years, and Semler Scientific was the second public company to adopt a Bitcoin standard. That was basically 4 years later after strategy. Now we've seen like the proliferation of Bitcoin treasury companies, but it's still mainly like not really real businesses. It's mostly just like very small shell companies that happen to buy Bitcoin. So it's funny because he's telling everyone to do it. He's been very successful at doing it. Yet it seems like almost no one has the courage to actually copy his strategy. Like, why do you think that is?
I think it was such a new idea at the time that he did it 5 years ago that people wanted to see how it was going to play out. Like I think it was really just so new that it was hard for anybody to wrap their heads around it. And then as soon as he showed the path, he forged the path forward, and others started to realize, wow, this actually is a viable path forward. Um, so I think it really, time really helped Michael in that scenario and made everybody come to realize that, oh, this is a really good idea, and this is something that maybe we should be adopting for our Bitcoin for our treasury strategy.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see the Bitcoin treasury company trend evolving over the next decade or so?
I think more traditional businesses are going to start buying Bitcoin, not necessarily, allocating their whole treasury towards Bitcoin, but I really see, you know, I see a lot of companies just, having 5%, then 10%, then 15%, then 20%. Um, and I think that will continue for a long time. I don't know if, um, we'll see like an NVIDIA, convert all of their treasury into Bitcoin. I don't know if that's the case, but I could really see them, start to do 5 to 10%, then to 15, then to 20. So I think the next era of Bitcoin treasury companies just may be normal companies getting a small allocation to it, and then that building over time.
I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on this. I asked Saylor in the past, like, do you think that we'll see another Bitcoin bear market where it draws down, 60, 70, 80%, which basically it did roughly in 2022. I'm curious, do you think Bitcoin will have another dark bear market like it had in 2022?
Would you say 70% is a bear market? Like
I would,
70%?
yeah, I would say, but you can, what do you think? What's your measurement, I
Yeah,
guess?
yeah. I think we won't see an 80%. I could see us doing like 40 or 50%. But with that being said, like I don't know. I really don't, but what I do know is that over a long enough time period, like Bitcoin will perform very well. Um, but given the different players in the market right now, such as Bitcoin treasury companies, and the government's attitudes towards Bitcoin, like I really think um, there's been a shift in perspective for Bitcoin, just generally. So I don't know. I think we would probably see, it's likely that we would see a 40 to 50%, but nothing near an 80 or 70% drawdown in the future.
Hmm. Yeah. What about this one? Do you think the bull market is over?
I don't. I don't think the bull market's over. We're bearish at 112K, so I don't really, I don't see that being the case.
Yeah. Um, Another one. What excites you most about like the future of Bitcoin treasury companies or Bitcoin at Semler?
I think what excites me most is like there is no rule book besides what Michael Saylor has done and has showed us, the path for. But after that, like there is no rule book, there is no corporate treasury guideline. It's open season. You can kind of develop any strategy that you want, any idea that you want. You could possibly do with Bitcoin. So I am really, really excited to see what uh, Semler and all of these other Bitcoin treasury companies comes up with in the future, because I think it's gonna change finance for the better.
Hmm. I completely agree. Looking ahead, whether it's Bitcoin or Bitcoin at Semler, and I know like we obviously can only share. This podcast is somewhat painful because we can only share public information. We can't share MNPI. So this is kind of where you and I are probably beating around the bush on like a number of different topics, which is unfortunate, but people will learn in due time. But like, what's something that you're most excited about, in the future, or like what you're excited to be focusing on? Maybe it's similar.
Yeah, I think it's just the ability that I get to work on Bitcoin every day is so exciting. Like that's I couldn't ask for a better way to spend my time. So, just having that ability every day to come in and be as excited and passionate about this work is, that's what I'm really excited about at Semler.
Hmm. Any advice? So obviously, you worked at Deloitte, now you're at Semler. Any advice for a young professional that wants to get into working at a Bitcoin company and is trying to break in?
Yeah, absolutely. So go to as many conferences as possible and meet and talk to as many people as possible. Make connections, because you never know where they could take you. Like my job at Deloitte, I got at a conference, and then also at Semler, I met Renee at the Bitcoin conference in 2025. So there's just a lot of opportunity out there. You just have to place yourself in those rooms and be willing to meet those people, or just be open about yourself, and just try and meet as many people as possible in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice. Well, Nick, this has been awesome. I think it's been good for the Bitcoin community and the similar community to hear you speak. And definitely enjoyed the slightly less than 2 months working with you so far. So it's been a great experience. But Nick, do you have any final or closing thoughts on the future of Bitcoin or the general future of Similar?
Yeah, I think, Bitcoin is here to stay, and it's the best money that's ever existed, so it will win. Um, and we're just, Semler is a part of that Bitcoin history, and we're excited to continue to be a part of that Bitcoin history. So,
Absolutely. Where can people go learn more about you and then obviously Similar as well?
yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Colletta Nick, CollettaNick, and Semler Scientific also has an investor relations website. I think it's ir.semlerscientific.com, and then also on Twitter, Semler Sci.
Yep. everyone definitely go give Nick a follow and give Semler a follow as well. But Nick, thanks again. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.